Silverberg, Director of the Center for Nonprofit Studies at Austin Community College, and welcome to Civil Society, where we explore issues affecting our communal well-being through a nonprofit lens. We're a proud partner of ACC TV, though during COVID-19, we're going virtual for our fourth season. My guest today is Pamela Owens, whom I will properly introduce in a few moments. We'll talk about the Black heritage in Austin and about what drives her and about the work of Six Square. But first, a personal word. Like so many others, I've been awakened from a rather complacent dream that while there is racism, I'm not a racist. I'm a good person. Recent events have shocked me to my core, and through many conversations and readings and viewings, I come to realize that I have indeed been the beneficiary of white privilege, and that Black friends and colleagues and acquaintances still suffer physically and psychologically from the pervasive racism in our society, of which I have been a beneficiary. I'm overwhelmed by how little I know about people of color and how simplistic my ideas and my behavior have been. And I believe I'm no different than many who consider themselves good people. As a Jew, I thought I could easily relate to racist implications, but I now realize that universalizing the experience of people of color actually diminishes my understanding of their lived experience and impedes the anti-racist journey we must all undertake. Martin Luther King taught over 60 years ago that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition is not the glaring noisiness of the so-called bad people, but the appalling silence of the so-called good people. As we said in our public statement of June 15th, the Center for Nonprofit Studies is fully committed to being an anti-racist organization focused on achieving racial equality in the nonprofit sector as well as in general society. We're accelerating our personal learning journeys, confronting our own biases and blind spots, and creating opportunities for others to do the same. We're expanding the engagement of people of color throughout the center's programming among both faculty and participants, and in ways yet to be defined. We're moved by a new sense of urgency to heighten our community's consciousness of institutional racism and systemic impediments to racial equity, and to aggressively progress on the continuum to racial equity to fulfill America's promise for all of its inhabitants. This 8-part series on the Black experience in Austin is one of many initiatives we're undertaking to put these words into action. Go to nonprofitaustin.org/civil society to see the whole series and access recordings of these episodes. I can think of no better way to get underway than to have a conversation with a good colleague and friend, Pamela Owens. She's the president and CEO of Edge of Your Seat Consulting, Inc., and is currently serving as the acting executive director of Six Square. To quote from her bio narrative, Pam feels she is most effective when she partners with organizations from inside out to streamline the hierarchical needs, create infrastructure, coach teams, shift organizational cultures, and of most importance, help leaders become more effective. Clients' transformations are the essence of her work, and they're also what bring her greatest joy and empirical pride. Based upon my own observations and experience, I can certainly attest to all of that. Pam's full bio narrative and resources related to today's conversation are online at nonprofitaustin.org/civil society. Pam, welcome. You and I have had conversations over the years about many topics, but particularly about racism and nonprofits. You're faculty for several of our center's certificate programs, leading sessions on diversity and bringing your well-honed humor and honesty to all that you address. You're a well-known consultant among nonprofits and are married to a lifelong Austinite. So let me start with a question that's on my mind at least, which why is or isn't the current racial reawakening different than before?
Interesting to hear the clarity come. I'm not going to sit in judgment of the timing of the clarity. I'm just happy it's happening. However, it needs to happen.
Absolutely. And I see it among friends and family. There's a greater sensitivity. There's an openness that never existed before, at least not in my lifetime.
Yeah.
So
And
what do you, yeah,
so
go
let me
ahead. Sure.
about us, Barry, even though you and I have had conversations that have been uncomfortable and feel comfortable in that space of discomfort, I'm learning now that so many people have had the luxury of not having to do that. So for you and I, we sprawl all the time and hug it out and go, well, not now because of social distancing, but when we were not, we would have intense conversations and be like, okay, love, you gotta go, you know, we're leaving. I now am realizing and holding space for the fact that I've lived my entire life in uncomfortable space and been trained to do so by my parents, whereas my counterparts have not had to. So whenever it starts to get uncomfortable, they leave the conversation before the magic of understanding happens. And I think that's a really big reason why we're here now. So the awakening has always been brewing. It's been thwarted by when the discomfort comes, we bail. And I think that's the difference. That's odd to you and I because we'll stick in it. Yep. We will stay in the rain and go for it. And I'm learning that I'm not giving an excuse for it or saying, I'm saying that I'm now learning myself that, oh, you're not used to feeling uncomfortable. I feel uncomfortable almost every meeting I'm in when I'm the only Black face daily, Zoom or otherwise. So I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you hoping for? I mean, as someone who's been involved with these issues, one, because you're a Black person, but also because you've chosen to be engaged in the issue, for such a long time. What do you see happening as a result of this new focus? Or what are you hoping will happen in moving society along?
Well, I think that I am cautiously optimistic for change. And I think when I abandon that and feel hopeless, we're not going to be okay. I think what I find interesting is as my new awakened white friends are like, we must do something, and they're over indexing their allyship, right? We're a couple weeks in, and now I'm hearing kind of like, I got a Charlie horse, this is uncomfortable. And I'm thinking to myself, we just started. Like, you start working out because it's going to be a marathon and we're going to have to surrender to the longevity of the journey together or we're not going to make it. And so I find it that's been a very interesting thing. So my hope is that we don't get a Charlie horse and stop. The other day we were cleaning out the attic and my daughter found a box of my books from college. And she opened it up and she found a binder where I taught my first diversity course in 1994.
Wow.
And the question was, Mom, as I was getting a certification at AM, Mom, has anything really changed? Like, aren't you still talking about this? She does the math. Mom, that's 27 years. Like, are you teaching the same stuff? Yep. So I found that to be interesting. My hope is that I don't wear out of teaching moments and teachable moments, and my new allies don't get a Charlie horse and sit on the side of the track. That's what I hope for, because it's a long game.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself having to be very, very conscious and intentional and realize my own prejudices, which didn't bother me before. So
it's hard because we equate having bias. I have bias. I have unconscious bias. We equate that in this world with good or not good.
Yeah.
Why can't it be good and truth? And why can't those two exist together? I have plenty of people in my life who mean no ill will, do not lead with malice, are not trying to wreck my life, that unconsciously don't realize what they're doing.
Yep.
So I have to make a choice to say, hey, I'm going to create a teachable moment. But now when I look, like I said to a colleague the other day, I'm going to tell you my first teachable moment with you. It was in 2002. It is 2020. You know how to Google. And I'm going to set you forth. I'm going to set you forth to educate yourself. And she said, where do I start? I said, why don't you start here in Austin? Well, what should I do? I said, I'm going to give you one tip. There are 15 African-American noted monuments and odes to African-American history in this town. Go study it.
Well, you just given me my segue to my next question. So you're currently the interim or acting director of Six Square, whose mission is to preserve and celebrate the cultural legacy of the African-American community that once thrived, maybe still does, in Central East Austin. Tell me about Six Square's mission. I've studied its website, and I was fascinated by the murals and the monuments, but frankly, I didn't know about. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm a fairly intelligent person, and my wife actually did a walk around with a friend of hers who lives downtown just last week and took all these pictures, which were just absolutely fascinating. And as soon as COVID is over, I certainly want to do that as well. But enough about me. Tell me about what Six Square does, and how can people get involved?
Absolutely. Well, let me tell you, as soon as we have a chance, you got to come do a tour. I'll go with you personally.
That's a private one.
Yes, you get a private tour. But let me just start by saying the name Six Square. So people are like, Six Squares, what Six Square, what's that? And I think it's important. And I always talk about this because I've been fascinated about how many friends don't know. But the name comes from the 1928 master plan of the city of Austin that displaced Black people only to a 6 square mile radius on the east side of 35. So that's where the name comes from. We were allowed to live in the 6 square miles, and that's where most of the freedmen communities are, in that space. And so in that space, you've got Downs Field, you've got Houston Tillotson, you've got the Carver, there's places within that, but it was literally the only place that was given to Black people to live. Victory Grill, all of those places. And so Six Square that were named after that. And since that time, of course, a lot has happened around gentrification on the east side. And so our true opportunity is to educate people about the space, what's once lived there, the importance of all of those places, the fact that we're now at a point where there's only about 10 original Black families that live on the east side left, period. 10 family names, and so it's changed significantly. And our job is to help sit on the edge of both innovation and preservation, to honor the history and the old, to hold space in the present for the new, and build on the future. And the way that we do that is to support and uplift, remove obstacles, assist Black creatives, artists. And when I say artists, I mean culinary artists, I mean restaurant owners, I mean entrepreneurs. We've got a young man that's got a record label, and helping to undergird that in the name of economic development and preservation. And so we have an active role in doing that. We do that a couple ways. We do some programming to assist. We support programming that's already existing. There's a lot of artists in Austin that people don't know about it. The more that I'm in this role, I'm like, oh, you don't know so-and-so? How do you not know so-and-so? They've been, she's been in residence for like 26 years. How do you not know that person? But it's easy to not have to know that person, right? What's a household name and a pioneer for us? Like, General Marshall just passed. Anybody that knew General Marshall knows he was responsible for probably training more than thousands of Black young men how to play golf for a variety of reasons. A, because he thought it was important for them to know the sport, and B, they translated that to their careers where deals were made.
Yeah.
So he took it upon himself to do that. So when I say his name and people don't know, I'm like, how do you, that's like, that was, we, in our history book, those are the people we knew. So at Six Square, we work to make sure that we're educating people about the history, but that we're also having a leg in education, heritage, beautification, which are the murals that you see and the art that you see and the cleanups that you see. And we partner with Raisin in the Sun to do that aspect. But we're also giving new voice to new generations. And so having said that, the more that I sit in this position, especially during this time, there is such an opportunity for education. But Six Square is still relevant because A, people don't know about it, and B, we are still fighting to not be invisible in Austin.
Yep. So how can somebody get involved? Regardless of whether they're Black, white, Hispanic, or whatever.
So the best way to get involved is you can go to our website and sign up for our newsletter. We have a variety of programming, both educational. We have lifted our entire platform right now. It's all virtual. So we did our Juneteenth celebration. It was completely virtual. We did both history and celebration. We do toast and topics where we have leaders come on and talk about a variety of topics, from candidates that are who are currently running for office, to how to start your own record label, to the systemic racism that exists in the arts. So the way that you can get involved, and we always say, start with education, like know what you know, and also support us with the fact that the very artists that we're talking about have lost their salaries because of COVID-19. South by Southwest didn't happen. The Urban Musical Festival didn't happen. And so buy local, buy from a Black artist, if you're going to have to buy note card, thank you notes anyway, buy them from a local artist that produces those. You're going to buy a pair of earrings, buy them from a local artist that does that. So there's a variety of ways. What I will say is, don't be afraid to come and try and explore, and don't be afraid to ask questions. We've always been here, and we welcome, come take a tour. There are a variety of ways you can engage. I've had several people call and say, how can we volunteer? Those are several opportunities to get involved.
Let me ask you a different kind of question. Knowing what you know today, what would you say to your younger self about your future? And what do you wish you had known when you first got involved in, you're doing advocacy work, among other things?
Are you implying that I'm old, Barry?
Yes. No.
I'm just kidding. What would I tell my younger self? What would I tell my younger self? So many things. The first would be, and I've tried to course correct this with my daughter. Don't sit quiet in a room for psychological safety purposes. So I spent a lot of time around tables, especially in the nonprofit world, in situations where my colleagues felt like they had to qualify me to be at the table and say, you get a seat at the table. And now I look back on that and say, the fact that you had to give me permission to be at the table implies ownership of the table and power over the table. And so I would tell my younger self, you already have a seat, and you don't have to wait for a white face to grant that to you. I would also say to myself, that empowerment thing that's done in the workplace is also white supremacist culture, that you don't get to empower me again. I'm already empowered. You don't get to bestow that upon me and make me okay at a table to engage. I would tell my younger self to absolutely negotiate, even if it doesn't come out in your favor, that you are paid equitably. I just had a boss that I had for 19 years call to apologize to me for paying me $52,000 less than my counterpart that did not have the same level of education and experience.
Wow.
And apologized and said, how can I make it right? And I said,
And the check.
reparations. No, it's gone, but thank you for acknowledging that. But that's a long time to write. That's a lot. And I knew it because the colleague and I talked about it. I was shocked when I found out what she made versus what I made. And that was 19 years. I did that 19 years. So I would tell my younger self, don't do that. Don't do that. I would also tell my younger self, and this has been a big revelation for me in the last several weeks, that I confused in my professional world people that cared and loved me with their love of my ability to make them money and make them profitable. And that's been a really huge learning lesson for me, that I conflated and confused those two. So I would say to my younger self, it is not your job to make somebody profitable on your back. And it's certainly not your job to make people feel comfortable all the time. So I've over-indexed goodness in a way in my career, and I am trading it in now for truth. And I have a 13-year-old daughter coming up behind me who has already figured that out at about age 8. And so it has course corrected itself. I pray I live long enough to watch how that plays out. But she has watched me and found it to be an unfavorable way to operate, and has called me on the carpet several times about bending and bowing and conceding in the name of a career shortening moment.
Yeah. So that, I'd really be interested in knowing, what do you realistically project will be the racial experience of your daughter and your son, whose exploits I follow on Facebook?
Yeah.
But as they grow up.
Well, we've had really significant talks about that. It'll show up differently. So for my oldest, 13, she was identified, she went to the elementary school and was identified by the principal in a principal's meeting one day as, I need you to understand, she's definitely a social justice type of kid. She's the one on the playground mediating between, and so for Allison, I think it will show up as she will not probably be well received because she's not going to take it. She said to me recently in a very intense discussion over tea, Mom, your generation's the last one that's going to take it. And after George Floyd, we had to have a lot of conversations because she was ready to burn Austin down to the ground. And we had to talk a lot about that. And we had to get comfortable with righteous anger. Like, I'm not going to tell you not to be angry because that's what was told to me and it didn't serve me well. Be angry and you get to feel the way you feel till you don't feel that way. But I encourage you to figure out what the actionable step is after that. So I haven't tried to truncate her anger. I'm letting her feel all the feels. I think it's an important step. So for her, I think she's about to blaze some trails, but she's probably going to be unemployed some because the world will not be as fast as her evolution. My 10-year-old son, that's scary for me because my son's on the autism spectrum, and I've been really contemplating and looking at pictures of him to try to determine when this world will no longer consider him cute and not harmful. And he's 10, and as you know, Trayvon Martin wasn't, much, about that young, 12. And I worry about Preston's ability to stay alive in this world. So I wonder what that will look like. I believe that he has an excellent advocate in his sister and always has, but I get fearful about him staying alive. I mean, we've had to adjust So, they don't get to go get the mail anymore. They're not allowed to go to the playground behind the house. We have a trail behind our house. They're not allowed to go on it alone. Um, it's been scary. And it's really interesting to hear my parents talk about it, because now they're watching it play out with their kids and now their grandkids, and question how much it's changed. So I don't know what that'll look like for them, but I also have to remain cautiously optimistic, or I feel like we lose the fight.
Yeah.
So that's a hard question.
Yeah, what I've come to realize, which is obviously you realized a long time ago, but is the stress levels that are created as a result of the racism. And so a key question is, what can each person do? We're almost out of time. So I want to give you an opportunity to say anything that I haven't asked you, and then we'll open it up to anybody who may want to make a comment or have a question.
What I would say is, I think this is the way forward. We have to keep convening conversations, however many times we have to. We have to commit to the process. But also we have to hold space for the nuances. I'm not talking about the burning of the crosses on the front yard. I'm talking about going to Hallmark and never finding a card with somebody that looks like me. I'm talking about, dadgummit, can I get a Band-Aid? That's my skin tone, right? I'm talking about the nuances of those things. Finding a doll for my daughter that looks like her when she was growing up, or, it's those things. And so I think the opportunity to not have to validate that anymore as people are becoming more aware is freeing, but we also can't let up.
Well, thank you. I would much rather if we would have had this conversation face to face, side by side, but I appreciate your willingness to talk about this, and with me and with those in our audience.
Barry, can we just tell them that we're on our very best behavior today? It's usually not.
I don't want to besmirch your behavior. Before we open up, I just want to mention that we're doing these episodes every Thursday. The next one will be with Kyrie Williams, who is the head of the Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Center at Austin Community College. And you can look at the others some other time. So Kate, can you open us up? Tell us if there's anything that was in the chats that we ought to handle first. And then we'll just give people an opportunity to make comments or ask questions.
So we're going to open it up for questions. I've just asked that everybody, if you could just raise your physical hand if you'd like to unmute and ask a question so we don't talk over each other, and I'll call on you, and just go ahead and we can just start asking questions now. If I miss you, just wave at me or shoot me a chat.
Do I have to beg?
I'll ask a question.
Thank you.
Jeremy.
Hello. So I first of all, I have a hard time even asking a question, so that awkward silence helped me ask it, okay? As someone who works for a nonprofit and I run our agency's social media, Texas Advocacy Project, with Bailey, who's on the call with me. I have struggled recently about how we post about advocacy for racial injustice, because it seems like all of a sudden we like jumping on the bandwagon that everyone else, and I always like our agency's voice and my own to be like very authentic. And so sometimes I have questioned, almost like if we've earned the right or earned it to be able to step up now to be an ally. I don't know if that exactly makes sense, but I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on some of those hesitations.
I think it makes a lot of sense. Pam?
I absolutely do. And I first want to say, and I'm just going to keep encouraging people that just you got to stand up to the discomfort and ask anyway, right? Even on down to if the response you get is challenging or hard, we got to keep working on, it's kind of like muscle memory. We got to exercise the muscle to ask and be in the discomfort. So I appreciate your question. My answer to that is, I am now, like, as of today, I would have executed my 39th meeting with clients around this very topic with social media. Do we post? Do we not post? We see, are we trying to be Ben and Jerry's? Did we wait too long? Do we have a right? My answer has always been and will continue to be, do a check on your organizational identity. What do your core values say? Do your core values have language around diversity, equity, and inclusion? Do they have language around individuality and respect for that? I would check there first, because what you don't want to do is do something that's counter to your identity, right? So after you check that in the social media space, which is a whole nother day of talking, do what feels authentic to you. And will you have some critics? You sure will, always. You're always there's always gonna possibly be a critic, but if you can align it with our core values, say this, and this is how we show up in this space, then do it. What I don't wanna see is the performative allyship, where you've dropped Black Lives Matter for 4 weeks on your social media feed and then you go away. So I've been advising my clients that it really matters what comes after the comma. It's a both and conversation. You are doing some social media, and what else are you doing on the inside? What is neglected in private is reflected in public, right? So what are you doing on the inside? Are you convening hard conversations? Are you having facilitated discussions? Did anybody stop and pull your teams together and say, we're going to hold space? And what 3 words come to mind for you when you think about these last couple of weeks? Have y'all done that? Has anybody examined the people of color in your organization? Do they need a couple of days off for racial trauma? Have you evaluated that? Like that's my thing. It's like, you got to be doing both and. So if your identity inside doesn't reflect it, let's work on that first, and do what's authentic to you as far as an organization. I had an organization the other day who's very much involved in gay pride and the month and then we got 4 weeks in and I go, hey, that is amazing. Black Lives Matter. Where is the LGBTQIA stuff? They're like, oh, okay, we forgot. I'm like, right. So now you're counter to your identity. So I need you to go back and figure that out. So those are the conversations that I've been having with clients and colleagues. So I encourage you to do it internally first and check that first. But I don't want you to feel guilt or that you missed it or you activated too late on social media. Don't give that so much energy. Even if that's your job, don't give it so much energy. Check the internal structure first. And that'll help guide you on what to post and what to do and how to manage that.
I would just add that as an organization at the Center for Nonprofit Studies, we had to face the same issue, whether we were going to be a bunch of meat tours because everybody was issuing statements. And so we started by really trying to hone down what could we do realistically, what's our role? And our role is not necessarily advocacy. It's really education and personal transformation. So, we then took that and are now operationalizing. So I think the response has to be unique to every organization. The last thing I would say is we realized, and it may not be true for everybody else, that we were not even reaching the audiences that we should reach if indeed we wanted inclusion and so forth. So we're changing our media. We're going to make sure we reach the populations of, Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, etc. So I'm not sure how that fits to social media, but certainly it fits with the electronic media or the and newspapers. So
let me just say this about the statement that you did put out. that you have on this is what you're reading for, right? When I read it, I said, that sounds like them. That sounds like that's what you're aligning, right? And if you had gone into, a Martin Luther King speech, I would have called you and been like, over index, it doesn't sound like you. Like, I would have just told you. So I think it's important, Jeremy, that when you read it, whatever it is you're doing, it sounds like the identity of the organization.
Other questions, comments?
So we do have a question from someone in the audience that wants to know, what is the best way for our organization to recruit more Black instructors and board members?
Great question. So intentionally, but not disingenuously. So I got a call the other day from an organization, and they said, we want to send you our plan. And this plan came, and they said, we need to recruit more board members and Black staff members and Asian members and Native American. And they had like 2 of this, 2 of that, 2 of that. And I wrote back, I am not the consultant for this because I don't do Noah's Ark hiring. Like that, tell me why. Tell me why. Tell me why. Performative, tell me why. Well, because we realize we don't have it. Well, the way to do that is authentically and intentionally, not in the manner for which you're leading. So what I would say is there are now programs in place like the New Philanthropist and some other programs where they are looking at board members and how to do that and putting more people in the pipeline. I was telling Mondo Rayo months ago when we were on something together, there was a time in the late 90s where we would meet as minority young whippersnapper leaders, and we would talk about our strategy, like we need to be on these 12 boards and we got to spread ourselves out. Pam, you're like the only Black, so you're going to do 4 and I'm going to do 2, and then we're going to send so-and-so over to do 3, and times have changed. And so now there's a pipeline of people that are ready to do it. And so I would say, get curious about what you want that to look like and why, and then be intentional and partner with organizations like the New Philanthropist. I think you should test your board on their why for that. Is it a check? Is it a box checker? Or is it because you want the ethos of the organization to be richer and more vibrant and more diverse? So I think you have to check for that. And then you have to be intentional about doing that. And it's the same way that you would do anything else. You got to start building relationships and you got to start building trust. And so that could be a 2 to 3 year game, right? People think that they can just, we decided we need to be diverse in June, and by August, by golly, we need to be. You're not going to build champions that way of your organization. You don't build trust that way. So I would say intentionally and genuinely, and be willing to get courageous around some hard questions, like how did we get here and how do we move past it?
So let me just tag on to that, is that on July 30th, we're actually a program, the episode will be on the racial gap in the nonprofit sector. If you go to our website and you click on there, you'll find an access to a report that was issued on that very question, both nationally and about Central Texas. So there are a number of assumptions people make that need to be checked. And then there are some real strategies, not least of which is to not replicate what you already have in your board. But you really have to reach out of your comfort zone to do that. So I'll leave that report to anybody who's interested in more information. Any other questions? We've got a few minutes left. Go ahead, Jessica.
Good morning, everybody. Hey, Pam. Hi, Jessica. So to follow
Hello
up,
to me.
yeah. Oh, sorry. Hi, Barry. To follow up on that question, I think it's a much bigger process than adding Black board members. So, and I understand people's intent in wanting to do that and the understanding of why that's important, but it's clearly a much bigger process. Do either of you, and more specifically Pam, what is a couple of things that you've seen maybe incorrect is an easier way to actually start the conversation, that went terribly wrong versus that went terribly right? in terms of what happens with organizations that are not necessarily authentic in that approach, and you are able to recruit Black board members, and then what? So more from the belonging standpoint, from the inclusion standpoint, organizational culture, what are some of the main points that you think the organization needs to have in order to support recruiting of Black board members?
I think you have to give voice to the deficit up front and own it, right? Like, okay, we have not performed well in this area, or we have been able to recruit, and then we're kind of at a loss of what to do next. Would really like your voice on what that needs to look and sound and feel like. Because even the best of the best, you get on a board and they've done all the pieces right. Then you get to the room and you're like, oh, I'm the Black board member again. I feel like I'm back in the 90s. So I think it's important to give voice to it up front. I think it's really important when there are nuances of unconscious bias that happen in the room, that you call it in the room when it's happening. And that goes back to, granting me permission to sit next to so-and-so in the room. I mean, I've had that experience. And so I think it's important I think that should be an ongoing narrative. And I think there should always be an opportunity to explore the nuances of, like, we had this board meeting today. What are some of the nuances that might have come up? For example, so if I am a Black board member and I have just come from a situation where I went to an AFP lunch and there's only 4 Black fundraisers in Austin still, and we strategically spread out at different tables at that lunch because we don't want to all congregate together, because then the white counterparts are going to say we all, we're ganging up and all sat together. So we've already strategically on the way in had to text each other to sit in different spots in the room. And then that afternoon I go to a board meeting and I've had all kinds of nuanced stuff all day. And then I get to the board meeting and the big problem is, we're discussing, where we're going to put the robotics lab or something like that. There's a disconnect that happens in my experience to just make it to the room that nobody holds space for. There's a first world problems anointing that falls over white privilege, that falls over a nonprofit in a space like that. And so sometimes we miss the opportunity to say, some, not all, or we know this is a luxurious problem to have, but, and so sometimes you lose us in the room because what we're hashing out is kind of a, not worldly significant issue that we might have experienced to just get to the room. So I think, again, opportunities to have real conversations and to own it. We were in a room the other day and we realized that we are able to recruit Black board members, but we want to make sure that we are not missing a step. Would you be willing to talk to us about that? Is a courageous thing to do. And I don't think we do it enough, because I'm going to tell you right now, there's a debrief that happens after the board meeting, and then there's a debrief. And what I want to start doing, which is not winning me many friends, is I'm letting my white friends into the debrief and saying, let me give you a couple of examples of what happened in that meeting that fell wrong. And here's why. So I think the push is to be willing to convene a conversation and be willing to hear the answer, and then let that navigate you on what to do.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add that report I made reference to, Race to Lead, points out that the challenge is access, not one of knowledge or competence. And so I think one of the greatest things is not to engage in tokenism of getting 1 or 2 people of color on your board, which often is the case. The first civil society program that I did in second season was, what does it feel like being the only Black person on a board? And I spoke with a good friend of mine, Bill Hopkins, who's a lawyer in town, and it was quite interesting. You don't accomplish anything. So it really is whether or not the organization is really ready to affect change. or not. And that requires them to go out there and go to places where the people they want are. Not just ask, the white folks on the board to bring in their friends.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
another question, any other questions?
Yeah, we have a question in the chat. How do we create diversity in conversations like these in Austin? How do we create those opportunities? Yeah. And then I have one if we have time.
Okay, we have Shay with raise the hand also. So,
Okay, perfect.
Pam, do you
Again,
want to do that?
intentionally, like I said, I'm on my 39th conversation. Anybody, the other night I hosted an event with 2 other Black females who are diversity, equity, and inclusion colleagues that I've known forever. And we had a conversation about race among friends. It was packed, and we talked openly and honestly about it. You have to keep willing to do that. I've had a lot of churches call me. One called me yesterday and they said, I think we're racist. And I'm like, oh my gosh, tell me more. What tipped you off? So we're going to do a conversation there. I think you guys have to be willing to start. And that could be with 3 or 4 friends. I think there's self-homework to be done, but I also think there's an opportunity. So if you want to talk about it, bring it forth and be ready to be uncomfortable, because we've made it uncomfortable. But I've convened several a week, and I always take the call, even though I've now answered several questions several times. I still convene the call because I think it's a co-created new normal and a co-created new process. So I keep doing it. So my answer to you is just start. Will it be perfect? No. Will you have closure on that first meeting? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, get comfortable with no closure when you're talking about race relations. There is no closure. It doesn't tie up in a nice, neat little bow. And you got to be willing to get and be uncomfortable and, facilitate some difficult conversations. But just start. You're in a book club, just start. You're in a bunco group, just start. You should, the center has a bunch of programming and opportunities. Do some learning. Hey, you want to take this class with me? Hey, I'm reading this book. That's how you start. But then you got to keep going and be open to the fact that you might have some unconscious bias, and you might be executing some microaggressions, and you got to stick with it.
Thank you. Shay, you'd raised your hand before.
Yes. Pam, you've in the past, I've heard you talk about abundance, which is refreshing, especially in the arts and the nonprofit sector. And I was wondering, I don't really have a pointed question, but if you could share some thoughts on how that pathway from the scarcity mindset to abundance intersects with the journey of racial equity and maybe the nonprofit sector at large, because we're all fighting for more. And if we fight together, we can get more. But it could be honed into the arts sector as well, where we have crossed paths and battled on that very front.
Okay, so I love that question, and poor Shay might get embarrassed because I'm going to use him as an example. But Shay, when you talk about like how to do it, Shay was one of the first to reach out to me and say, "Hey, let's have lunch and talk." And it was a very open and honest conversation about racial equity. And during that conversation, it turned to the education piece around a scarcity mentality. So imagine if you are historically told that you can only live in a certain part of town in Austin, right? You've got only a few square miles. And then you realize that you are seeing around you others, whether it's in the art space or other space, who are getting access to dollars and support in ways that you aren't. Then you become and start acting out the idea of scarcity, right? And then you become part of the cycle of feeling like whatever you get, you have to keep to yourself and it can't be shared. And so I think that day we talked about Austin has done a really good job at addressing growth and innovation, and a very poor job at addressing healing and trust building. So one of the things that's been challenging, is, especially in this space, in this work, is switching off the scarcity model and the lack of trust and turning on an abundance model that says we're stronger together. We don't even have to all totally agree, but we're stronger together. And that abundance is that there's enough for all of us. And so that if Six Square's winning, then Big Medium's winning. And if Big Medium's winning, then the Vortex is winning. And if the Vortex Theater's winning, then the Carver's winning. And if the Carver's winning, then Leadership Austin is winning. And the Center for Nonprofit, like that piece. And so that's been the model that I've been really trying to subscribe to. But I've learned in the last couple of weeks that that's not even enough. You have to be willing to take a stand and be non-negotiable on things that perpetuate a system that is inequitable and white supremacy. And so the reason why I say that with Shay is because I've just walked through a very challenging situation with Shay. And Shay, which is some courageous white man stuff, I have to say, called it and said, I will not be a part of this because my colleague has not been treated respectfully. And that's how you change the scarcity piece to the abundance piece, is that not all money's good money if it's on the backs of Black organizations and entrepreneurs and artists and creatives and professionals. It's not worth it. And that's courageous, but it's hard. And everything has a cost, right? So you have to weigh that out. But yeah, I'm working toward an abundance model. And that even means for me that's sick and tired, that I gotta stay in the ring and keep creating the teachable moment.
Okay, we have time for one more question before we close up. Kate, do you have a question or anything in the chat we want to raise? Say again?
We have a chat question.
Okay, could you raise it?
Sure. Given that this is the 30th anniversary of the ADA, is this an appropriate time to bring ableism into the dialogue, recognizing the value of amplifying at a time?
Wow, that is a great question. And what I would say is, we need to pace ourselves and allow for the issues of race to flow independently, because it's often commingled in an effort to create some comfort. So what I would say is that the ADA piece is super important. I think anytime you try to combo pack issues, even though I think those are all related, as I do other issues, I think the message will get lost on people. So what I would say is that is absolutely important message, as is LGBTQIA, as is socioeconomic disparity, as is all of it. But I would say right now, as we're sitting in the middle of a Black Lives Matter movement, we might want to give some space and time before we come to the rally talking about other important issues. That's my personal take on it, but I think it is equally as important. But I think one of the things that we hold right now is clarity around the issues, as I started with, the conviction about this issue, and the opportunity to issue compassion. And I think that's the model we should use with every inequitable issue we're facing. But I caution people to, some people said to me the other day, I want to talk about race, but could you put it between ageism and so? I'm like, I'm not doing a sandwich.
And I think that we need to close, but I think it's critical that we not try to universalize issues and ignore the specifics or the particulars of any particular issue. And I think the issue of ableism is a very, very important one. And while it will not change the world, we will definitely cover it sometime this year as part of this civil society series. So I thank you, whoever raised that suggestion. Appreciate it. Need to close because we did say this was until 11 o'clock. I want to thank particularly Pam for making herself available and for being my kickoff guest on this series. I want to encourage you all to go up there onto our website and check out the other offerings. Would love to have you all part of that. And I wanted to thank Kate Tolliver, who is the managing producer for Civil Society and coordinator of the center, for her work behind the scenes and making everything possible. You'll find Pam's bio narrative and the various organizations and resources referenced up on our website in the next couple of days. And with that, I would just like to say, hope you all have a safe and remain well and have a great day, and look forward to seeing many of you next week.